I am currently working on building a custom underseat subwoofer enclosure for 3 JL Audio 13 TW5s. We want this enclosure to be durable, so in this video we are applying a special coating, but we have to do some prep work first. Hey everybody, I'm Mark, welcome to CarAudioFabrication. Let's dive on in. Now later in the video, we're of course going to need to wire up our subwoofers, and to do so, we're going to be using the Cord UltraFlex speaker wire from our show sponsor, New Concepts. The Cord speaker cable is available as 10 gauge, 12 gauge, 14 gauge, or 16 gauge, so it can be used for both subwoofer and speaker applications. It's available in blue or this red and black combination, and it's available by the foot, or you can get 100, 150, or 250 foot long spools. The Cord speaker cable is oxygen-free copper and ultra flexible, making it easy to run and install throughout a vehicle. Be sure to check it out at the link down in the video description. If you've been following along, here is where we left off previously. We added these details to the side and front of the enclosure that help to match the aesthetic of the vehicle. We also did these rounded corners during the woodworking process. If you haven't seen those videos, be sure to go back and check them out. The texture coating that I plan on using to finish this enclosure is fairly forgiving to work with, but if there are large gaps between some of the seams of the different pieces, I want to make sure I fill those along with some of the brad nail holes. As an example, this slight gap right here would potentially show through that finishing material, along with some of those pinholes right there for the brad nails. So I'm going to begin the process here with filling everything up with this plastic wood all-purpose wood filler. I'm applying this using an old gift card. You could also use a body filler spreader, and you may be wondering why not use body filler anyhow. Previously on the channel, I would have used body filler to cover a large surface like this, but I wanted to try this out for this application because it's a lot less expensive and it's more readily available. I think it's important we work together to try out new techniques and materials all the time to see what could be better. Now that I've got it applied, we do need to allow 2 hours for this material to dry before we can sand it. So that is one downside in comparison to using body filler. Usually body filler is going to be able to be sanded a lot more quickly, but hey, that's one of the trade-offs. I'm just going to go work on something else in the meantime. It was lunchtime, perfect excuse to go to Taco Bell. We are officially dry now, so we can move on to sanding. Now, a big tip here, it's easy to think, hey, I want to knock this down quick, so I'm going to use a power tool to sand this, but I actually would recommend for these curved surfaces that you use something like this. This is a soft sander, and this can conform to the curvature that we're going for here. That way we don't have any flat spots as we sand this. Now, the flat areas of the enclosure, on the other hand, we can just knock out quickly with this. I want to make sure during the sanding process that I'm collecting as much of the dust as I possibly can at the source, so I've swapped out to the Mobile Solutions Dust Mite, which, as you saw there, is placed into my router table station. That way I use the existing dust collection for the router table. Another option is to simply have your dust collection tube or shop vac close by to capture the dust as much as possible. And notice when sanding that I'm doing a crisscross X pattern to evenly sand the curved surface down. I'm also spending some time knocking down some of the flat areas with the orbital sander. Now, in my opinion, the key to any finishing process, whether it be applying a coating or doing upholstery, is proper preparation. I want to make sure that I'm protecting my work surface, in this case, from any of the excess coating that may fall off of the brush, and I also want to make sure that I have my enclosure prepared and lifted off of the surface so that I can easily go around the bottom corners. On this subwoofer enclosure, we're going to be using Duratex for the finishing coating. I've covered Duratex previously on the channel. The main thing to note here is that you need to use one of these special rollers. This roller sort of has a texture to it, which is going to give us that texture coating when we roll it on. Other than that, this coating is pretty self-explanatory. So now that I've applied the coating to the top and the sides, I've let it dry all night, and guys, you've got to see this. This is looking so sick. I know it's pretty basic, not the most complicated enclosure in the world. Obviously, we're not doing vinyl inserts, acrylic, things like that, but for a nice, simple, durable underseat enclosure, I think this looks pretty good. Give you guys a close-up there of what the texture really looks like. As long as you're careful to make sure that you go back and forth and you kind of even out any high spots that you may have, it looks really nice and uniform. Again, I'm really excited with the way this looks. Now, if we do look at it here, you're going to see that there is some material that's still not coated, and that's because now that this is dry, I need to flip this over and set it on my work surface, and we're going to coat the bottom. Same process here as before. On those large flat areas, I'm going to use the roller, and on some of those more complicated areas where I can't get the roller, I'll just need to use the brush, and I'll do that dabbing motion to give it some texture. I have now allowed time for this final layer on the bottom here to dry, so now we can move on to installing these subwoofers and getting them wired up. Boom! Before wiring, it's always good to do a last-minute double check and make sure that there is no wood dust or anything else inside the enclosure, so I did a quick vacuum on the inside. And we also want to kind of think through our plan of attack for wiring. Now, obviously, I have 3 subwoofers here. These are the CarAudio 13 TW5 V2s, and you can see it says -4, so that means this is a single 4-ohm voice coil. So it has one terminal on each side here, but I'm going to wire this single voice coil from each subwoofer in parallel. I'll put this graphic up on screen for you guys. This is from our other show sponsor, Crutchfield, and this gives us a wiring diagram that we can use. You can see that we can wire the 3 subwoofers in parallel. Each is 4 ohms, and that's going to present a 1.3 ohm load at the amplifier. Now, not every amplifier on the market can be run at that low of an impedance. Some are only going to be able to run down to 2 ohms, so this is something that you obviously want to plan ahead for a lot earlier in your project, but in this case, our amplifier can handle a 1 ohm load, so we are good to go. So my plan is to come through the wall of the enclosure right here. I'll wire to that first sub and then obviously the next 2 subwoofers as well. Now you may be wondering, why is there not a speaker terminal here already? I could always add one if I needed to, but on the last few projects, I've had good success with just simply drilling a hole and then sealing up that hole with some butyl rubber. So I basically just have a tail hanging off of the enclosure that I can tie into the amplifier power, obviously. I just kind of like the simplicity of this method. There's no wire terminal that could potentially fail. You just have a direct wiring path. But hey, there's always more than one way to do a project in car audio. If you want to use a wire terminal, obviously you could do so. Now, because this speaker wire is 2 round profiles next to each other, rather than drilling one large hole like this that leaves the openings on the top and bottom there, I'm going to drill 2 smaller holes that are the size of one of these conductors, but are just right next to each other so that I can still push the wire through while it's together like this. Wiggle this through here. Definitely has a good tight fit. So it'll just leave a little bit of room for that butyl rubber to seal up. So I've got that first wire going through the enclosure, and I've got it split off to go to each side of the voice coil for the subwoofer. Now I've also made myself 2 jumper wires, so that's going to go from subwoofer 1 to subwoofer 2, and then this one will go from subwoofer 2 to subwoofer 3. Before the subwoofers are wired in the way though, I do want to do some pre-drilling of each of the mounting screw locations. On this project, I'm going to be using some of these coarse thread wood screws to hold in the subwoofers. So I want to drill a nice small pilot hole. In this case, we're using a 1/16 inch drill bit. To make sure that our hole is centered in each of these mounting hole locations, I'm going to use a transfer punch. These transfer punches come in different sizes, and this is going to allow me to perfectly locate the center of that hole by just giving this a little tap with a hammer this direction. Now for actually connecting the wiring, again, this is pretty self-explanatory. We're just going to follow our wiring diagram while we make these connections to each subwoofer terminal. But something else that I like to do is I like to make sure that I'm not going to have any vibration noises in the enclosure with the wire bouncing against the subwoofer, or even worse, bouncing against the outside of the box. So I like to use this product from SoundShield called Wrap It. This is a closed cell foam that has adhesive on the back side, so we can cut pieces of it and wrap it around the wiring, preventing them from making vibration noise. Once we have each of these wires wrapped, we can add the subwoofer and make sure that I carefully line up with my pre-drilled holes, and we are good to mount. We then, of course, repeat this process until everything is mounted. Next up, we need to get this enclosure installed and playing. So if you're new here, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. If you need wiring or wire accessories for your next car audio build, be sure to check out our show sponsor, New Concepts, at the link down in the video description. A big thanks to them, along with Jerry and the rest of the Patreon membership team, for making these videos possible. And thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching.